we've now moved on to this idea that at Windy City Riot, Jon Moxley should beat Tetsuya Naito. And you know what's really funny? If you remember back to the summer of 2022, just after Forbidden Door, Dave Meltzer suggested that Adam Page should win the New Japan belt.
Yep.
And they crucified him.
Yep.
And now it's like this widely held thing that Jon Moxley should beat Tetsuya Naito. And I can see kind of why they're doing that, because they think that it'll bring this change in New Japan, but it's not really going to change anything below that top level.
No.
And what you're going to do, so if Jon Moxley doesn't work all the tours, they cannot afford to not have that belt.
Right.
So when Jay White picked the belt up at Dominion in 2022, he barely worked all the way up to Wrestle Kingdom. And their numbers cratered. They went through the floor. And I always think of it like, this is kind of a cultural difference, but I always think of it like, so sumo tournament in the current moment, the Yokozuna is probably bowing out. He may have bowed out already. I've not actually seen today's batch show results. And the attendances will drop. The Yokozuna is part of the attraction. And it's very similar with your champion. And I think we might see similar, keeping an eye on All Japan with the numbers for Champions Carnival with Nakajima not being involved. So it can often be very important to have that. So if you were going to have Jon Moxley win the belt, and I don't think you should.
No.
I think you run with your champion who people are invested in and who there are multiple stories with the people that can step up. The Yoda Tsuji story. You can do a Shingo Takagi story. You can do stories with Shota Umino, who could finally beat him. You know, there's plenty of things that you can do. And Zack Sabre Jr., you know, they've got history as well. You can do all these stories, and it would make much more sense to concentrate on your own product than bring somebody in and say that the person coming in from outside is better than our main guy for what? What benefit you have? He needs to be working every show. He needs to be working every tour. He needs to be working every main show. Is he going to work AEW?
Right.
Will that affect his booking? You know, are you going to get kind of clashes with the booking with that? That then means he can't be beaten in AEW either, which would be clever on his side in the current context. It would be clever on his side. But what does it actually do for New Japan? And the only thing I could say is that possibly if you wanted to do the Hiroshima show, you know, in the baseball ground that Naito talks about, and you wanted him similar to what they did in the summer of 2020 with the evil win just so Naito could get it at Jingu in Summer Struggle. You can do that, but I just don't think that long term or even short term it would be as beneficial as people seem to think it is. But I think it's what it is that they want that top end to change, or they want something different. And I like the idea, you know, you do Jon Moxley putting over Shota Umino, but then what do you do at Wrestle Kingdom?
Right.
Because if that event doesn't involve Tetsuya Naito, they ain't selling. And you know, I saw someone say, oh, if you could get Kenny back over, you could do Kenny and Naito, but it's not that easy, and you want him to put over somebody,
right?
Whether it's Tsuji or anything like that. So I'm quite worried about that prospect. I don't think, you know, whoever gets the New Japan Cup doesn't really make much difference, because Sakura Genesis, week before Windy City Riot, it's like a false dawn sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if they ran an evil Naito match and it drew far more than people think it did.
Yeah.
I absolutely think it will. I think that match will draw far more than anyone thinks it will, because it's different in Japan to here in terms of the perception of House of Torture. And it doesn't make them a main event draw. It doesn't make Evil some big, massive draw. But people enjoy that act. And the big thing with the show match was that it wasn't overdone. So a lot of the other matches, it's completely overdone. It takes over the match and that. The way that Naito structured that was most of the interference was around the end, and it was run off, and it was a couple minutes, straight into the finish, bang, there you go. So there wasn't this kind of sinking feeling of having this constant interference. It actually worked quite well. And maybe that's his influence, because he can kind of answer, say no, he can do all different sort of things that other people can't.
Yeah.
But I do think there's a huge difference. And, you know, yeah, do I think the match quality is the same as it was a couple of years ago? No, but is it interesting to see what comes next? Yeah, I think so. And sometimes that freshness it's not a bad thing. You know, you get character developments, and the people that are really invested in kind of how the characters move in New Japan are probably getting more out of it than the people that were kind of invested for how great the matches were. And that just shows you different parts of the audience.
Right.
But I don't see why they would change course currently when their business is actually improving for the first time in years.
Well, that's it, right? Like, what the Western fan wants is not necessarily what the Japanese fan wants. And I think, you know, if there's something that's come out of the last couple of years, it's that a Western expansion for New Japan is just not going to work, right? They tried it. It got absolutely sort of creamed a little bit by the pandemic. AEW didn't help them at all. But from a business perspective, they haven't been able to do it by themselves. And that's fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not a bad thing. I think it's just, again, like we talked about, like, I have a friend who constantly likes to say transition periods are difficult. And I think that's also, transition periods are hard. People struggle with them. And I think a lot of that is what this sort of boils down to. Like you at one point talked about, I think when we talked about the first news about Okada leaving, you know, is this kind of the last gasp of a specific type of New Japan Pro Wrestling?
Possibly.
That a lot of people fell in love with. Right. And, you know, is there a lot of like, how could we keep that? And how, you know, what could they do to get that feeling back again? You know, you're not going to have that feeling back again. Like maybe you could have a different feeling that might be good. It's just not going to be the same as what it was at that time.
And like, wrestling runs in cycles.
Yes.
It runs in cycles. So you'll have that, but then things pick up and things change. Right. No different to what happened with New Japan, you know, previously as well.
If anybody would go to Japan and actually do a tour, it's Jon Moxley, right? But at the same time, I'm kind of with you where it's like, it's one thing to fantasy book it and be like, hey, that'd be really cool. That's one of my favorite wrestlers. I love it. And there's no issue with people doing that because they think it would be fun. But the people who are trying to make serious arguments that this would be best for New Japan, I kind of raise an eyebrow at that because it's hard for me to see it, you know? I just don't quite get that, but
I think what
do I know?
They want what they want to watch, and I get that completely.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be a challenge, you know. And I think the way that they look at it, and you can see with the way they've structured their US arena shows, is they can give that US part of their fan base or the Western part of the fan base those sort of shows in that setting.
Yes.
But then they can also cater to their Japanese fan base and their Asian fan base with what they're doing in Japan. And you know, Naito's always been a difference, although. He's probably, well, you look at Windy City Riot and you think maybe he's not as small a draw in US as people say he is. But interesting, isn't it?
They got to add somebody for that Ontario show, right? The ticket sales for that one's a little bit slower. So
they got to flip that one. I think the big thing that they did with Windy City Riot is they announced the main event before they put the on sale.
Yes.
She created that hype. You know, people knew it was going to be Tetsuya Naito, Jon Moxley. Huge match. And that worked really well. This one, I think they're looking at developments out of that show into this one.
Yeah.
And so they need to push that one. But, you know, focus on Windy City Riot, is their biggest sole US show in a very long time. You know, with good late sales, it could overtake Dallas in 2019, which was the first night of the G1. Which was an interesting one because, you know, if it was just about good matches, then Dallas in 2019 would have done as well as, you know, MSG. But they lost Kenny and the Bucks. And it shows you, you know, Naito didn't attend that one. He was in the B block. So it shows you that just the fact that they had a great match on the top of the card with Okada and Tanahashi wasn't enough to draw that crowd. And that's why I always think it's not always been about that in New Japan. But I think it's because it's the most associated thing with New Japan. Same with Omega, you know, with Chris Jericho. You know, people didn't go in that expecting a great match. It ended up being a great match. But they just wanted to see these guys wrestle because it was such a mix of styles and a mix of people coming from different places. And it felt like, oh my God, I've never seen this before.
Right.
And it was a business changer. Was it a business changer because it was a great match? Maybe. But I think it was more of a business changer because it shows that some people could be stars outside of WWE.
Yes.
You could develop this attention, this attraction outside of WWE.
Yes.
And I think that was more important than it being a great match. Told you I was going to piss people off. I'm sure I am.
I told you were going to have a Naito rant, and you said, no.
It was kind of like half a Naito rant.
It was
the
half
Naito rant would be, leave him fucking alone. He is drawing them houses to all the people that you wish were drawing him houses weren't.
Ooh.
So, leave him alone to do his thing while he still can, because we all know he's on a limited time scale.